Welcome to this next episode of Your Leader Story, brought to you by myself, Jennifer Potter, founder of Frankly. And I am thrilled today to be speaking to the lovely Owen Turner. Owen, thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
And cannot wait to get into your answers. I think you've got some really lovely perspectives about what it is to be a leader, and I'm looking forward to diving into that. But for those people out there who don't know you, because you are very well connected, Owen, but there may be one or two people out there who don't know you, so I am going to introduce you, and I am going to introduce you word for word as you've asked me to describe you. So forgive me for reading this out, but I want to get it right. So welcome to Owen Turner, Managing Director and Creative Director of United by Design, a brand and design agency. You were set up in 2007 following working for design agencies in Leeds and Bristol. You're also, as if that's not enough, co-founder of Space York, a community interest company, community-led co-working space, and current master of the Guild of Media Arts. You proudly ran York Design Week for 4 years in the city of York through Kaizen Arts, and you're married to Caroline and have 2 lovely children, Sam and Sophie. I added the word lovely in because it wasn't in your description.
They are lovely. Thank you.
And you live and work in York.
I do. Yeah.
So it is a delight to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm a little tired, but yeah, I'm good. Yeah, looking forward to a couple of days off due to half term.
Oh,
But yeah,
fabulous.
we're busy and lots going on. So yeah, it's exciting.
Super. Well, I'm going to dive straight into this concept of leadership and ask you to tell us, what was your first ever leadership position?
Ooh, leadership position. I obviously I had questions from you beforehand, so I've had a bit of time to think. But it's very obvious to me. It was around the age of kind of 8, 9 years old, really, and I was captain of the school football team. Yeah, primary school. It was through sport. It was something that I loved doing. I enjoyed school, primary and secondary school. But yeah, that was my first position, I suppose, as a stepping into the foray of leadership. But I didn't know it was that. Even the word captain was not really in my mind something that I thought was to do with leadership. It was just on reflection. It was that, yeah.
Yeah. And there's a chat when you look back now and you think about, being a captain as opposed to part of being one of the members of the team.
Yeah.
Did you have an idea at the time that you therefore needed to do something different as a captain than being a member of the team? And what were
Yeah,
they?
I mean, my primary school was very small, so we had only a few of us to kind of form up a football team. But I think it's the change in responsibility. You have to manage the team a little. You have to understand the game enough to be able to talk to people both on and off the pitch. And bearing in mind at that age, it's on a very different level to as an adult. But yeah, it was something that I put my heart and soul into, I suppose, and continue to do that even now. But that responsibility shift, I think, is different from just playing and the highs and lows of that to having to take on some decision making on the pitch and being the
Yeah.
person that people are looking, they're holding you accountable, even if it's just to make a decision to substitute a player, for example.
I mean, you've listed like responsibility, accountability, knowing how to play the game, which you could argue is strategy,
Yeah,
coaching the rest of the team. I mean, you've labelled some pretty,
big
um,
things
yeah, but
at the
that
age of 8.
referring to leadership, right? At
Yeah,
the
I
age
think
of
it's
8.
yeah,
Oh,
it's a lovely thing, and I think to be exposed to that at an early age, not really knowing, because I don't believe
yeah, yeah,
I think I've said in answer to one of your questions about being an accidental leader, and it's generally been I found myself in roles of responsibility, and you could say leadership, by accident or by accidental kind of naivety, and
yeah.
then taking on that responsibility to then be a leader. Yeah.
As it is for most leaders. I mean, one of the things I'm curious about is whether anybody ever put "I want to be a leader" on their vision board. when they were a kid?
I don't. I mean, even the vision board thing. I mean, obviously, as a creative, as a designer, part of process to deliver work, we have to put mood boards together. But even that visioning kind of idea of writing things down and borrowing images from places to help you with that vision going forward was well is a relatively new concept for me. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to work out how far back that leadership title starts coming into play. But yeah, it's
Mm.
definitely through sport.
Yeah, great. So you're leading us quite nicely into, now as an adult, not an 8-year-old anymore. Now as an adult, what does the word leadership mean to you now? Or in these 10 seconds at least, because it may be something which moves a lot for you in terms of how you interpret it.
Yeah, I think it's a responsibility, absolutely. I think I view leadership in a softer way than maybe some more corporate kind of views on it. And that's, I suppose, living and breathing it how I would like to be led, as well as, putting myself forward. Um, but yeah, I think I take a lot of it from sport. So on and off the pitch, I think it's important. As you mentioned, those key words, and there are more. I think that as you get older, you have to see them slightly more seriously, especially when you're running your own business. It's something that can be a lonely place, and sometimes you have to just kind of take a deep breath and understand what those words mean. And then, yeah, I suppose, yeah, take the responsibility as best you can and be wise enough to shape your own future as much as others that you're leading.
Yeah. And I think that point about it can be a lonely place is like if I had a pound for every client I worked with that said that as a leader, it can feel incredibly lonely. And I don't think enough leaders are talking about that aspect of leading, in my opinion. So, with that in mind, Who do you look to for inspiration, and where do you go for support?
Um, I'm very lucky, I think, in terms of, lucky in the sense of I've worked hard to have the people around me that I have, and it doesn't happen overnight. My network is broad, as you kindly highlighted, but that's over many years, not just 18 years of business, but, some of the relationships that I've garnered have come from friendships that I had at school that have then turned into business opportunities or introductions, for example. And that the confident ability to ask for help, to be able to stretch to people that you trust and have that confidence to give you good advice, or even just be a sounding board. That's really important. So that support network's really strong, I think. And York as a place, or Yorkshire as a place, is quite friendly. I would say very friendly to others. But even when I was in the southwest, equally it was the same. My old bosses, for example, Richard and Gary, I've recently been speaking to them about advice
Wow.
and guidance for for the work that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis with my team for work, and they didn't bat an eyelid to step forward and help. But yeah, the support network is there. Sometimes you have to go out and search for it within the business world, and there are lots of great experts out there, you being one of them.
Aw.
But in terms of, I suppose, how I'm inspired, I think it's wide ranging, from um, businesses that I really admire, that I have a connection with, and again, I think that there's an authenticity element here, that human factor, and although I may not know them, brands that I've followed and people that are running those brands, I feel quite a connection to, because I like what they do. I resonate with their purpose, or how they're running their businesses. So Finisterre is definitely a great inspiration in terms of what they've done to date. I found out about that brand when I was surfing and snowboarding at a kind of university level. and continued to support them, purchasing their products. And I don't know the owner, but what they do and how they run their business is very planet first and people first.
Yeah.
Um, Painter jackets, Hugh and Becky, found out about them through Hyatt Denim. They used to work with David, who ran Howie's, and then on to Hyatt Denim. And again, there's a story there of people and doing things really well. And then I suppose sport, rugby in particular has been huge in my life, as one sport that I've played, but I've played others. I remember looking at Daley Thompson, for example. That's just flashed into my mind when you asked the question initially on an email. But yeah, Daley Thompson, the New Zealand rugby team, and there's been a great book written about them called Legacy by James Kerr. Which is really about leadership, is fundamentally about how to change and shift the dynamics of leading and being led, and how you can really get into that step change to improve and then become world dominating, which New Zealand have had for some time become. So yeah, lots of different places. I also look at just going back to the support, but also I suppose the inspiration. Family have been really great. My mum and my dad have done so much for me. I suppose as I've grown up, but now my dad is still involved in the business now. He came on board, so David at work, dad at home. But yeah, that's
Distinction.
important because yeah, it's again, it wasn't about the two of us kind of locking heads as father and son. When I asked him, it was very much about it was laying it out on the page and saying, how can we do this together? But I needed to separate it from home. But yeah, my dad and my mum have both. I mean, my mum led the house. She's always done that, supported us all, both as a mother, but also, running the household fundamentally as a business, keeping
Yeah.
it afloat. And, when my dad used to be out and about, on a week away or 2 weeks away, doing work, my mum would be working really, really hard, and that was evident from her doing everything from the housework to keeping us alive and breathing and
Yeah.
happy to the logistics of it all. And
It's a very
but
different leadership
yeah,
position
it
for
is.
leadership,
Yeah, and I think
nonetheless.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. The guidance that she gave me as a young man, I remember fondly sitting by the fire watching telly, like a Channel 4 documentary or whatever. And you just talk and have that lovely, lovely time, but it's still guidance and shaping you for the future. So yeah, it's great to have those different areas of influence, I think. So yeah, having that different perspective from different places is key.
And moving into you as a leader, so we've kind of like looked at who you take inspiration from, where you get your support, but thinking about you now as a leader, and I'm going to ask this as a is there, and rather than to assume, is there anything that you love specifically about being a leader? And I'm specifically asking it that way because I don't want to assume that you do love it, because some people might not. So yeah, is there anything that you love about being a leader?
Um, I don't know what I wrote down, Jennifer. Let me just look. No, I'm not going to look.
Speak from the heart. You're very good at
Yeah,
that.
I'm going to. I don't think I don't love being a leader, but I also don't like running, and I do quite a lot of running.
Could be
I know
mine.
the benefit. I know the benefit of it. I know that I can cope to some extent with it, and I embrace it. But I see it as a challenge. It's not easy for me. I don't necessarily get out of bed going, I'm a
Woohoo!
leader, because I don't, I don't act like that. I don't think anyway. Um, but I do get out of bed and I love what I do, and that has evolved into um, a position of leadership. Because when I set up the business, for example, I did start out on my own, so I had to lead myself, put one foot in front of the other. So a bit like running, you have to start, you have to put on your shoes and your shorts and get out running. And I think that's the journey that people take on on the course of leadership. It's a stepping stone thing. I am by no means at the end, because it's a learning curve, a day-to-day
Lifelong.
challenge. Yeah, lifelong, absolutely. And I saw that with my dad in particular. As a corporate leader, he was in banking for the majority of his, well, all of his career, from the age of 17. And he was learning until the day he literally stepped away from that. But I think, yeah, it's a challenge. It definitely is. I find it challenging, but I see it as a learning, and that's the good thing. The hard decisions that you have to make, some of the things that I've had to decide upon due to that position of leadership have been really tough in the last 18 years of running a business. Um, but also, with home, you have to make leadership decisions with either on your own or with your partner, or the family, or however it kind of pans out. But I think that, yeah, it's very much a role to lean into and learn from and with, rather than just saying I'm a leader. I don't chant that going to bed or
Yeah,
in my
I'm
yoga
doing
poses.
leadership today. I'm not quite sure how well I'm doing it, but I'm doing it.
Yeah, yeah,
So what about the counter then? What are the things that you find most challenging about being a leader? What are the things that get under your
yeah.
skin?
I mean, it's a bit of a counter. I come to work and I love what I do, genuinely. um, and that gets me through most challenges. That love and passion that drives me and the business. I think it's the loneliness, and
Mm,
that has and can lead to darkness. And I don't mean that to bring the conversation down, but it is a reality. There are, we've seen quite a lot of, or lack of, sunshine the last couple of weeks, and it can feel in particular kind of seasonal change that winter has always been a bit of a, a slightly weird kind of time in the calendar. It's end of year. It's in terms of the business, and some of the challenges that arise kind of at the end of one year, and then looking ahead into a new year. So yeah, that loneliness can hit hard sometimes, and I that I've learned over time to manage. Both for myself and others. When you're working as a team and
mm,
leading a team, you have to observe that. And I think more and more so with the better times that we've seen with well-being, especially since COVID. But I think that we're challenged by that as leaders. You have to be more aware, but that's not necessarily a challenge, because I like people. So it's something that yeah, sometimes I do like, but that again is some of the challenging conversations you have to have. It's difficult because although
mm,
you can't have everybody as your friend, that's how I kind of come to work as a leader. So yeah, some of the harder conversations are sometimes more difficult as a leader. But yeah, it's kind of that, what's it called, the tightrope or the double-edged sword of leadership. I don't know if that's a theory, Jennifer.
It is
Leadership.
now.
It is now.
We'll make it.
We should
We'll
make one.
trademark it. The
The
double edge
double edge.
theory of
Yeah.
leadership. And it's interesting you bring up the topic of mental health in leadership, which is
Mm.
some of what I'm hearing you saying in your answer then. And I'm curious to know, you've that's a cycle that comes back round, as you've alluded to. And what have you learned in terms of how do you resource yourself when it's challenging? What do you kind of pull in as resources around you to help you get through those more challenging times?
Yeah, I default to sport. Um,
Running.
yeah, well, now running, I unfortunately, uh, hit an abrupt kind of end to my rugby career with a bad injury, but very grateful that I can still walk and run. So in terms of being able to resource myself, I think both in terms of fitness, my actual bodily fitness, your mental health through exercise, I've always known it's been a good default, and whatever that needs to be. It could be a nice walk out in the countryside, and again, we're very lucky in the place that we live in York and North Yorkshire, striking out to the coast, etc. It's really special to be able to do that. Um, But I suppose for me, that resilience that you have to dig deep sometimes, and that breathing, I forget to breathe a lot of the time, but those deep
Me
breaths and
too.
those moments of being able to see through the day that you have an opportunity to shut a door, close it, breathe, move on to the next thing. And that ability, whether it's making a cup of tea just before coming on here, just taking that moment to just recenter. I think when I was a lot younger, it was kind of running from one thing to another, jumping, straight in and not taking that time to just box one thing off and go to the next one. So
Mm.
that would then lead to overwhelm and not necessarily making the best decisions. Um, and also just finding that time for different things. And that could be music, gigs, spending time with different people. Again, leaning into friendship circles, having again, different people that I can kind of turn to and just spend time with, and you get a different perspective, and you can switch off quite rapidly because of that.
Because you get into flow state
Yeah,
when you're with those people.
yeah.
So, what would you say the biggest lesson you've learned so far about leadership and being a leader?
Ooh. I, Again, I think it is about that learning every day and not being too um, reliant on getting everything right, because ultimately you will fail. And for me, I've failed a lot, but I think managing to pick yourself up and go again, and that's where that resilience and I suppose the um, kind of understanding that it will come good again, and it might not be brilliant, but it will be good. And you need to just kind of keep chipping away. I think there's a patience thing. I
Mm.
truly believe, and I talk to my best friend Rob about this a lot. He runs his own business as well. Is about being patient. A lot of things these days, I suppose, in the world that we live, are rapid. You need to get back to people, and you need to come up with things very quickly, especially with what we have to do. You're kind of beholden sometimes to the speed at which a client might be going with a project. But actually holding firm and being patient and saying, well, actually, let's give ourselves that space, and me included, to be able to take a breath again and just look at the thing in front of us and be patient. And sometimes it could be a couple of minutes, hours, but sometimes it can be years, to get
Mm.
to a destination. Truly, we're not quite there yet, and I sometimes think 18 years of doing it, shouldn't we be there now? But it's part of the journey, and genuinely enjoying it, finding that joy every day, in whatever we're doing is really important.
Yeah, and I think you're making me think about Brené Brown and her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, and about like a lot of that book, like the morals within it are around, when you embrace imperfection, you open yourself up to way more creativity and innovation. I'm thinking about that book because you're obviously in the creative sector, and
Yep.
you are a man firm in my mind that I think of when I think of the creative sector and people being creative on a day-to-day basis. Like you can't you can't put too much pressure on yourself to be perfect and run at a million miles an hour and expect to get it bob on, can you?
No, and I think that in what we do, I don't view myself as the best designer. I knew I was never going to be the best designer, but I'm a pretty good one, and I just chip away at it. I learn and I move forward, and each experience. And again, going back to one of my old bosses, Gary, he said you just need to learn something from each job that you do. And that could be the relationship that you have with the person that you're working on, whether it's client or collaborator, partner, supplier. It could be one of your team members. It could be all sorts of the programs that you're using. Work out how to use a new tool. Um, but as long as you're learning, then you're moving forward in a really positive way, and you will get better. And I think there's that. People want that immediacy of, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, I've started a business. Well,
Hmm.
actually, you've just got to keep chipping away, and that will come. Entrepreneurship is a new term. It was, when my friends did business studies, they weren't talking about at school. They weren't talking about entrepreneurship. It wasn't even in our
No.
psyche. It was just something that
Yeah, it
you
wasn't.
kind of has become, and then now
Yeah.
pressure to be. So when I got to university, it was like, well, I'm going to be a graphic designer. This is exciting. But actually, it's a job that you can, earn a living from. And, you can do all sorts of things, whether you're doing leaflets, websites, or actually just sitting there coming up with new things. I mean, who doesn't want to do that?
I know. I was just making me think about the conversation you had in your career conversations at high school, and entrepreneurship and leader were definitely not on the list of
Nope,
jobs
nope.
you might have wanted. And it's also made me think about when I first set up my business 12 years ago. In the first year, I read this blog that popped up on LinkedIn where someone said, let me tell you what you need to know to run a business. And the first thing was it takes 10 years to successfully set up a business. And I remember at the time thinking, no way am I waiting 10 years, all that impatience. And I'm still trying to set it up 12 years later because it's a never ending challenge.
And I think that cycle will only grows as you move forward, and growth is different for different people. Success is different for different people, um, and ultimately you will go in cycles, and sometimes they go back a little bit. It's not the fact that you're going backwards; it's just that sometimes you have to reset and then go forward again,
Yeah.
and that's where a bit of that patience, I suppose, that I refer to comes from. Who thought that COVID was going to happen, and how what
Mm,
some people rocketed their businesses. They were,
yeah.
interstellar, but
Yeah.
others had to complete, and we were kind of not necessarily one way or the other, but we had to reset, and we learned a lot of lessons from it. But I think, yeah, having that ability to, just take a deep breath and look at what's going on, is really important.
And that's bringing me really nicely into the next question. So thanks for the segue that you didn't know I needed.
I didn't know that.
um, you mentioned earlier some of the brands that inspire you, Finisterre, Painter, Hyatt Denim, all of which they're all organisations that are putting planet front and centre in their businesses as well, which obviously is a big passion of mine.
Yep.
When you look to the future, and I don't know how much future looking you do and how far out you look, but when you do look to the future, if at all, what do you see? What are you thinking as a leader that you need to be able to have in your toolkit in order to be able to, navigate that future that's coming?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think that there's definitely something in that kind of quiet leader, or the leaders that don't really know or accept that they're leaders, and they shouldn't be pushed necessarily to be leaders because they are one anyway. I know that sounds a bit odd, but I think that there's an appreciation for the people that, turn up, they do a great job, and they are leaders, but probably are a little bit quiet, in doing so. So I suppose, again, leaning into the different personality types, I think that's quite interesting. I find it sometimes quite difficult that people kind of tell you have to, be a leader. And, sometimes that becomes a little bit kind um, of a challenge for me because, you do what you do on a daily basis, and, you need help and you need guidance and you need support and advice, and people can do that. I know that you've done that in many different ways for me, sometimes more formally. I think it's that adaptiveness to people
Mm.
and their business types. Certain high growth, let's say an e-com business, they might need some very um, forthright advice and training and development. But I know that for me, the typecasting, I suppose, in terms of that profiling is different. Um, Again, I can't remember what I wrote down in my
Yeah.
answers, Jennifer,
I
but
think that's a really interesting point that you're making about, and I'm totally with you in that like the quiet leaders, that there are so many different ways to be a great leader that I think in the past we've unhelpfully had this sort of stereotypical idea of this is what a great leader looks like, and you need to be able to model this, otherwise people won't know that you're a great leader. And
yeah,
actually, one of the things in my work is that we try and avoid off the shelf leader development programs in organizations because every organization has its own ecosystem,
yeah.
and what kind of leadership they need is going to vary based on their own business and what they already have in their organization and the vision of where they want to get to. So I think that point that you're making there is really important about the future.
Yeah, and I think that there's going to be more to deal with, definitely with mental health, but also that kind of trust and confidence. You want to be led by people who know what they're talking about. And I know that from, doing what we do, you have to come in as a specialist, and it's taken time. When sometimes we can nail it, sometimes it takes time and a conversation and a situation that we potentially manufacture, or whether it's a workshop or whatever it needs to be. But it can, you don't just instantly make that decision. I'm quite reflective, and again, it can take that time of, through authenticity, to build a relationship. I mean, we've known each other for quite a good couple of years now, and then I know sometimes you'll come to me and say, "Oh, what do you think?" And I'll have to go away and think about it. Whereas some people go, "Yep, yeah, that's the decision," because that's how they lead.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not one's right or wrong.
No, absolutely. And that's where psychometric profiling tools, when they're used well, they should get across that message that we all have to be willing to work with different styles and different preferences and not assume that other people are just like us. Um, so yeah.
So
Right,
yeah,
two questions.
toolbox. I think there's
Toolbox.
so many things,
There's loads.
and I think it's going to be interesting as I start to get to that slightly older demographic. I'm not completely old,
What
but
are you considering as older in your
oh well,
description there, Owen?
just a bit more wise than maybe a 13-year-old.
Wait a minute. 13 to old, that's a
Exactly. I'm not
huge.
trying to say an age, Jennifer. I'm dodging the question. But I think that's the interesting thing between, school and college and university. And I'm hugely passionate about education, not just for my own kids, but the opportunities that we can provide as a business and as a sector, creative digital tech sector. But, in terms of being able to give younger people that opportunity, but not scare them, not give them that pressure that they have to leave school and be leading straight from the outset, but they can learn to be leaders over time and maybe look at the things that they do already. As I discussed about football, I never stepped onto the football pitch, even when I got the privilege to become a captain, or a rugby pitch or a basketball team or whatever I was doing. It was a privilege to step onto the pitch and then be asked to be a captain, but then I saw it as working with a team. And I think that again, it's a pressure that starts too early, and it should be something that's phased, but being aware of that
Mm,
through time.
yeah,
And it's something that is not, there's not an easy answer, because obviously there
no.
are systems in play that you have to almost break to then be able to you know redevelop in a way that can be I suppose more easily accessed.
Yeah, it's a really good point because one of the things, one of our missions is to make sure that as many leaders and managers as possible get given support and training before before they enter into a leadership and management position. And 90% of the time, most people find themselves getting promoted and they've got no training or support in terms of what to do and how to lead and
Yeah.
what's different now. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's I think there are challenges. I mean, if there's a bigger entity, the organization, business, then there should be that training and development, and it will always work when invested in the people, because the people run and shape the business, as it moves forward. But yeah, there are systems in play, and I think there are lots of different types of business now, more than there ever was when I was looking out from careers conversations. And even the newer sectors and jobs that people are getting into that don't necessarily have leaders.
Mm,
It's like, well, who is my role model? Who are the
yeah,
people
yeah, it's a good
that
point.
I can look to and go, in terms of design agencies, it's a bit of not an old boys network, but
Mhm.
it's things are being broken down, Kerning the Gap, women in roles of leadership within design, mentoring, to bring people through. It's just amazing these days, but it wasn't there when I first started. So it was looking at certain agencies in certain places that were all run by men, and it was run in a certain way. They informed my vision of what a
Mm,
design agency could or should be. Um, or now shouldn't be. And I think that's the interesting thing.
Mm,
Like, what are the options? How can people be made more aware of how to get to somewhere when it's maybe not a model that is evident, or there's a leader to show you that.
yeah, I love that. It is time to break the mold a little bit.
Mm.
2 more questions.
Ooh,
And one of them I've not told you about, so it's a surprise.
is this the curveball?
So the first one, if you could have any job in the world, what would that be?
My job.
No, look at that. One happy customer.
Yeah, I find it really difficult now, especially having invested quite a bit of time in myself and the business. But yeah, I reckon I could demote myself slightly, or promote myself potentially. But in terms of what I do every day, it is a joy. I go home, and although I'm tired from the day potentially, I'm still buzzing, and
No.
it can be something that is hard to switch off from, because it's so amazing, and there are so many things that either we're doing or others are doing that you find really inspirational, both on your doorstep, to the global stuff that's happening. And
Mm.
going back to what I was saying about, my mum in particular, I have fond memories of her leading us around a supermarket and helping her with the shopping during her summer holidays. And I didn't realize that I was being informed by all these big brands. And eventually, we're not necessarily in the world of big brands all the time, but it's all applicable. And what we're asked to do every day is put people in a more promising position, for their businesses and organizations. And honestly, it's a joy. So yeah, I'd be hard pushed to say another job. Um, I mean, I did joke to somebody, maybe a lumberjack,
Oh,
but that's a bit weird, because I'd have to, work out how to use a chainsaw and be outside all the
all
time.
skills that you can learn.
Yeah. No, it's not decrying lumberjacks, but or tree surgeons or anybody in that field. But I think I've been lucky enough to work in an industry that's looked after me. It's also, there's been some real hard, tough reflections that I've tried to change along the way. But yeah, on a day-to-day basis, I do love my job. So
And it's a privilege, isn't it, to know that you're in a job that you are relatively good at, I've heard you say,
yeah.
and that you enjoy, and that there's nothing else that you would choose beyond. I mean, then you just got to crack on and make the most of it, haven't you? If you're lucky enough to be in a position to think, oh, I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you use the word, and I stop myself from saying it these days, but I think, the luck is made. I know that for a fact. The fact that I've had to roll my sleeves up, and some of the stories I could tell you, not for this podcast, it's probably another one. um, around what you shouldn't do, within the creative industries, to support your role, or to show that you're demonstrating that you're doing what you need to do. But yeah, on a day-to-day level, to be able to go to work and say that you're learning about different sectors, about different jobs, about new markets, that you're coming up with exciting new things on a daily basis. Yeah. And the buzz from that, when it works, is even better, when you see
Yeah,
the growth of organizations, or how a charity may have been able to build a new headquarters. You go, well, we've had a part to play in that.
yeah, yeah.
And it's wonderful. So yeah, very lucky,
Lucky.
reluctantly lucky.
Right, my last question.
Go on.
What's the question that you think I need to be asking on this podcast?
Oh, I know you did mention the type of leader, or I inferred that I was either an accidental or a quiet leader. But I think that there's something more involved in the people that are the leaders, how they're, I suppose, and you've gone through it with some of the questions, but that type of leader that we are on a daily basis, that could be a good thing.
So what type of
Um,
leader are you?
yeah,
And what type of leader are you, Owen?
I'm definitely a learning leader,
Mhm.
a
And
leader that's learning. Um, yeah, and I think I am a quiet leader, apart from on a rugby pitch, and then that's a
it's a
completely
big
different story.
change. Well,
Yeah, it's
context is everything.
a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde scenario. But yeah, it's when I've been on a rugby pitch, it's a different story. But it's I mean, it's a young man's game. I'm too old and broken now, but
What's that
um,
age word again?
yeah, there's a time. I mean, I'd still love to play, but I know that I'd get broken again. And the amount of time I've
If
spent
you're
too much
running.
time in A&E and with concussion and breaks and all that kind of stuff. So I get too involved and end up hurting myself. But I think it's the ability to be able to reflect on things like that. It's a wonderful questions to be asked.
Mm,
And it makes you think about other scenarios. I think around your life that informs how you have become a leader, accidental or otherwise. And that could be with friendship, friends and
mm.
family and situations, that you have to just take a step. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. It's a rich tapestry, isn't it, when you start getting into it, when you start pulling the threads out of the blanket that, like were woven to get you to this point, and then you start to notice all the influences that you've had and the ups, the downs, where you succeeded, where you failed, the lessons that came from all of that. It is a really interesting area, I think.
yeah, and it's almost something that, as I've mentioned, is that it feels like it's really untapped.
Mm,
The power of even if we don't use leadership in our daily. I mean, it's only probably one of the only reasons I'm talking about it is with you. Um, but also, you know, if you apply it to your friendship group, your close friendship group, you go, well, who's the leader? Well, there
yeah,
isn't one because
yeah,
it's a flat hierarchy. But then you go,
yeah.
hang on a
Well, are
minute,
we all leaders?
who's leading who?
Who has
Um,
the power?
Yeah, kind of. It's is it what's the influence there,
Yeah,
and and then it kind of blows up, and you can get into all
yeah.
sorts of things.
It's a good point actually, because we say one of the sayings we have at Frankly is that leaders are lurking everywhere in your organisation, and actually we would say if you have the budget, give leadership development to everybody at whatever level they're in,
Yeah,
because what you learn from leader development is how to be a really responsible adult and take great responsibility for yourself and not take too much responsibility for other people. Like encourage them to take responsibility, and if you can do that culturally to everybody in your organisation, you just have people stepping up more and taking more authority and responsibility, whether it's in their day job, a task, the wider culture.
yeah, and that's I mean just to reflect on what we've both said there. My I think view on how an organization can be modeled has changed again more recently with the co-working space where it's
Yeah,
volunteer led.
yeah.
There are currently 5 volunteer directors, non-paid, alongside our day
Day
jobs.
jobs.
Where we make decisions together. There are some decisions that have to be voted, and if there's 3-2, then the three will that decision will be made. And we'll spend time at length sometimes going over something, but a decision does have to be made, and we have to make them together, based on our members, the members being in the co-working space, and then we will always get their feedback, which is even more interesting and complicated. And the flip side of that is that more commercial thing when you're going to some of the work that we do with United by Design is making sure that people come along for the ride. When change is being made on a brand level, you need the internal and the external
Yeah,
kind of journey to be made, and people can derail that very rapidly if they're not engaged and not part of that
absolutely.
advancement. Yeah, so yeah, it's fascinating, and again it's bringing a smile to my face because it
Mhm.
is that learning, and different people's knowledge and expertise. You do not have to know everything to
Yeah,
be the leader, but you need to then have the people around you, like you say, who come up and can hold another part of that model to
yeah,
move forward in a really lovely way.
yeah. In fact, actually encouraging leaders to let go of feeling like they need to have the answer to everything is a
Mm,
big part of my job.
yeah.
And actually, your job is to facilitate that in others. And how do you switch from feeling like you need to always be solving and resolving to actually empowering and liberating in others? I think that's a tricky and important dynamic that people go through when they're on their leadership journey.
And a really good thing for me to take away from this chat.
I'm glad to be of service.
Thank you
Well,
very much.
Owen, it has been an absolute pleasure. I wanted to scribble the whole way through because you've given me loads of nuggets, so I'm gonna enjoy watching this over again so I can recapture all those nuggets.
Great.
And
Well, thank you very
yeah,
much for
thank you
having
for
me.
making the time. I really appreciate it. Everybody's busy, so it
No,
doesn't
it's
go
been a pleasure.
unnoticed.
Thank you
And
very
thank
much.
you for coming on.
Cheers, Jennifer.